I thought you guys were going to join it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Archipelago, which obviously is not just your regular pelago. It's much, much better than that. It's an archipelago. I'm here with Bonnitta Roy and Brendan Graham Dempsey at ground zero of a project to start socially mapping, encouraging, cross-pollinating, and mutually updating the various islands of new thought and new culture and networks and events generally throughout the northeastern corridor of North America. We're looking at shared support, shared vision, intergrowth, and even a common sensibility or calling that might come out of the land, the ecosystem, the climatic and mineralogical firmament, and the common networks of rivers and lakes and seasons. So maybe we can start with Bonnie sharing a little bit about her sense of the vision or possibility that incepts this project and what she hopes or feels that it could be, as well as whatever the stars have been telling her lately.
Awesome. So this notion of the archipelago is not something that I sat down and made up. It's something that started to emerge for me. I mean, a lot of the times we're walking around wondering what wants to emerge, etc. And what I noticed over the last, I would say 5 or 6 years, is that, we used to have to go to either Boulder or San Francisco to meet up with like basically integral adjacent people. But there was a lot of, even when I was in the National Qigong Association, our 10th anniversary conference was in Boulder. So all the energy was going to these epicenters. And then I would say just prior to COVID and certainly after COVID, people started to shift demographically. A lot of people spent some time in South America. A lot of people spent some time in southern United States. But slowly but surely, I started to see that there were these like little mini epicenters that were emerging along, let's say, the eastern part of, east of the Appalachians, east of the Adirondacks, along the east coast of North America. So we have like a hot spot in Toronto. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And then there's Maple in Vermont. There's Brendan's Sky Meadow, very close there. There's other hubs of people that no longer live at Maple, but that live up there. I have friends in Palinville, a group of friends of mine who've been doing a lot of work, who spent a lot of time in San Francisco, are now in Saugerties. And then, there's these little houses of people that we know in between. And then I'm here in Northwest Connecticut. And then there's not surprisingly, several groups of people in North Carolina. We have the Washington, Maryland belt there that is kind of hard for people to move to. So we started getting this idea of, instead of like having this one big mega retreat center, or that this kind of whole little chain of islands, which is what an archipelago is. It's like these islands that are like the top of your knuckles, but underneath they all come out from the seabed and are connected. And I started to think of like having like pilgrimages. So if people wanted to spend a summer kind of hanging out with people, they could look at something that was happening at Maple and Sky Meadow. Or my friends over in by Yukon, they have set up their property for a nice, small retreat center. And so that this notion of like being able to do like a northern pilgrimage or a southern pilgrimage, or like people used to walk, the whole Appalachian Trail, could do the whole thing, and started to see two things were very interesting to me. Well, three things. One, it's because I live here and it's closer. But, back in the day when we used to go to integral theory conferences, they were really great. But I always despaired because, let's say it cost you $1,000 and the conference was like $390, the air flight, and it was like all the money went to the airplane and to the hotels. And what I really like about this kind of vision, it's not really a vision, it's just what I'm seeing is happening, this kind of energetic kind of clustering, is that most of the money, if you pay to go to one of the things, you can be really happy because the money's going in network, you know? And I always, even when I was working or adjacent to Game B, I always said, like, one of the really big Game B things you can do is make sure that, you know, you're spending your money in Game B type things. You know, even if you just move more of your value into, you know, spending into Game B, this is also something that I think is really important. So I started to just think about it as the archipelago. We had this big bonfire here last year, and gave out these postcards that says "Go live together" or "Go live together," the archipelago. And so we just kind of had fun with being card carrying archipelago people, but it's really associated with this migration to this several bioregions, but this chain of bioregions in this area. And I thought that was interesting and exciting enough to try to name it and have people consciously bring more energy into that otherwise natural and organic migration. And I forgot about Maine too. You know, like Sean Hargens from Integral is in Maine, which is kind of, if you think about it, you would have never predicted that a lot of us would have ended up, you know, these people would have ended up clustered along the east coast of the U.S. or the eastern part of the U.S. So North America. So yeah, so that's how it started, and yeah.
Terrific. We'll go on to talk a little bit about some of the specific things that are going on involving us in this chain of regions. But maybe, Brendan, if you have any feedback on this, if you feel like you're an archipelagan, any reflections on Bonnie's comments or your sense of the vibe of the archipelago?
Yeah, well, I used to be a meta pelican, but now it's all about the arch pelican. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful concept, and I've noted this kind of cluster, this corridor, constellation, whatever you want to call it. Call it an archipelago if you want. I personally have trouble pronouncing it, but I'm getting better. But I think it's true, and I think it's a great way to kind of network the different nodes together and kind of become more conscious of who's in our backyard and trying to weave some intentional exchanges and this sort of Silk Road of people in this space and exploring these topics. So I think for me it makes a lot of sense too, especially in a kind of bioregional framing, because Sky Meadow is, apart from doing a lot of events conceptually in this space, it's very much about the land here and the space itself, and one of the kind of key tenets of permaculture thinking is kind of letting the land talk to you and tell you what is to be done, how to approach it, and not to kind of impose your will on it. So a lot of the permaculture activities and the organic gardening and all that stuff that we do here is informed by a sense of sensitivity to bioregional realities and kind of microclimate and all this stuff. So that's very important to me. And in the sense of looking forward, and I know, Layman, this is work that you've done and have been concerned about, is trying to increase sort of the bioregional awareness of communities to be more aware of sort of not just who's in your sort of mimetic tribe, but also who's in your kind of regional space, and the kind of shared concerns and interests that you have, just again from sort of a location-based, place-based orientation. So all those things resonate very well with what we're doing here at Sky Meadow. Did I answer the question? I'm not sure if I did, but that was my first impression anyway.
The question was vibe based, and so I think you gave a vibe based answer. That seems appropriate.
Nice.
I think the format we're toying with here is to have sort of small chunks or segments, and to set it up in a way that we can do multiple versions of this in the future that fold in people who are working on particular projects or hubs or islands within this archipelago. But since we're the ones who are here in the first episode, we'll deal with the stuff that we're working on. Okay, the Metamodern spirituality retreats and or labs. I've been coming down from Ontario to Vermont twice a year-ish to lead these, which Brendan is hosting at Sky Meadow. My work on the metamodern spirit and integral post-metaphysical spirituality and meta-shamanism and the integration surplus model of religion and spirituality pairs very nicely, I think, with the spiritually oriented experimentalism and the new mode of depth seeking that one finds growing in the sensitive crevices of the emerging metamodern ethos. There are a couple of things that have been informing how we've been doing these events in my mind. The first thing that comes up for me are the themes. We're building each of these around particular contemplative inquiries. We have an extended week-long form for people who want to be part of the inner sanctum, deeper participants. And then that ends in a weekend form where more people come and to some degree experience the field that the week-long participants have been creating. We've done contemplative themes around goodness. We've done breath work. The themes are features common to human spiritual traditions that we can explore and experiment with and comment upon from out of the collective sapience of our corner of the metamodern ethos. How do these chunks of classic spirituality land in our hearts and bodies and minds and in our perceptual and imaginal and electrical selves? I think the second thing that informs these events is that there's a sort of fractal iteration to the process. We've been harvesting what comes up. Brendan and I sit down after each event to feel out what the shared field has been pointing to and try to include that in the structure of the next event. So there's a sort of self-evolving frame to it. And that also involves remembering or capturing or perpetuating things that start to become regular signature events or practices. We have certain rituals, we have certain kind of group engagements and exercises that are becoming characteristic of these retreats and their mood. The third main thing we're trying to do here is really the experimentalism that's led us in part to call it a metamodern spirituality lab this time. We want to encourage people to use this as a space where they can try out exercises and processes and aesthetics and things like that they've been working on and aren't fully sure of, and get high quality feedback from people who are strong, deeply rooted participants in this kind of cultural ethos. My temperament obviously informs this to a large degree, which is to strongly encourage efforts of classical spiritual life, but without asking people to commit to beliefs or phraseology, trying to get that balance right between structure and fluidity, between bacchanalia and the monastery. But a huge part of this and what we've been doing is coming out of the particular people who've been attracted and the spirit that they share and the way that they become infused with the landscape, as Brennan was saying in another video, I guess, about permaculture. We've been trying to make opportunities for everyone to participate in the harvesting and the planting and the landscaping and the spontaneous temple construction and ritual elements in tandem with the ecosystem. That the shared spirit of the people and place is primary in terms of what I'm hoping to encourage and orchestrate in these kinds of events. And part of the reason that we've chosen to do this twice a year, to have a spring and a fall session, is so that we can build a quality of anticipation, a quality of the sacred calendar, because the philosophy communities and the practice communities and the online networks have to, yes, come together in in-person events, but these can't really become a culture. They can't influence civilization in a way as long as they're just scattered, erratic, disconnected kinds of events. They have to become integrated with our anticipations of the cycles of our year and the cycles of our lives and our anticipations about travel and spending. These things have to become like our birthdays and our Christmases and the turning red of the leaves on the trees. So that's my sense of why we want to do it regularly and seasonally, to have it become part of the natural background timing and tempo that our species has always used in order to figure out how it actually wants to constellate the sacred and how it wants to set up the preconditions for culture and civilization transformation. Brenda, is there anything you want to add to your sense of what we're doing there with those retreats and or labs?
Gosh, that covered a good deal of it. I don't know if I would be able to add anything as eloquently and concisely, but I feel like you captured a lot of it. I mean, I guess I'll just throw in again the sort of emphasis around the exploratory nature of it, the openness of it, and which I do think is a fitting renaming around this concept of lab. There's something I keep coming back to around this space and this ethos that's deeply alchemical in my mind. There's something there's like a metamodern alchemy that goes along with the mythopoeia and the kind of exploratory experimentation with the sacred. And so I like that framing of it. And for me, that's a big part of the ethos is when people show up. It's not a sense that we're going to all be doing exactly the same thing, either that we did before or that we're expected to do from some kind of doctrine or catechism or something. It's largely co-created and developed in situ and together. And as you say too, though, that forms a process of kind of a continual snowballing effect of accretion, where the things that do work get maintained and sort of enshrined in meaningful ways. And there's always room still, though, for continual growth and change as well. So I think that just I think we both care a lot about getting that balance right, so that it's neither unstructured free for all nor kind of rigidly confined in a particular direction, but that there's a lot of room for both of that, and that's something I've valued very much about the events. I think everything else you said really kind of hit the nail on the head, so I won't re-elaborate. And so I think that was a beautiful expression of the sorts of things that we're doing here. And I also, I guess, would just say I would reiterate that idea that there is this lovely element in which this is becoming sort of an expectable structuring and a kind of calendric feature, right? That we're thinking in terms of orienting ourselves to these sort of meaningful gatherings in a way that does feel actually very special. As it's not kind of isolated conference to conference, switching up every time. There's both continuity but also discontinuity, and a big part of the continuity is that kind of rich seasonal natural grounding in the space, which is really meaningful for me. So I'll leave it there. I think everything else you said very, very well.
So I just want to double click on what you said about establishing these rhythms, and I love the way you said, like, we live in a consumer kind of culture, and we're offered these hallmark events, these hallmark days. Maybe they're not all hallmark days, but like Christmas and Easter and Valentine's Day and blah blah blah. And what we're trying to do, I love the way you said, we already have this in our culture, but can we shift them to the kinds of events that are more congruent with what we really care about? Because we're still in need of those rhythms and to match them. So we have the bioregional, and then we have these natural rhythms that are in all cultures. So I think that is very important for people to hear, because then they will say, oh yeah, it's not spend a lot at Christmas and then go to Sky Meadow. It's like, bring my family to Sky Meadow, or try to make these transitions, these slow emergent transitions, and then a generation down the line, you have a new culture. So I thought that was great. A question I have is, do you have you have this broad title, Metamodernism, but do you have any topics? Like, are there topical themes that you bring to the different events, or is it open until the very last minute, or is it something that you will be designing before the event? I was just curious about that.
Yeah, the contemplative themes for each event seem to be, like we were saying, sort of nested in the emergence of the previous event. So usually something comes up within each event that is at least in my mind, is like, oh, that's a really good that point for the next one.
Okay.
Right. So and we'll talk about the upcoming ones. Maybe I'll do that right now, which is we've had these ones on goodness. We've had these ones on breath work. There was one other one. I can't remember what that one was, but in the breath work one, some of the discussions sort of naturally started turning toward how do we handle the concept of God, the experience of God, practices around the ultimate signifier in kind of metamodern spirituality. So for the spring session that's coming up in May, God in quotation marks is how I'm thinking about it. What is God in the metamodern sense? There's a lot of ways to come at that. A number of people have been writing and pondering extensively on how we hold the divine within the sincerely ironic cultural sensibility. Just like many people in the integral community have tried to figure out where God goes in that kind of second tier thinking.
Right.
How does God work with, I mean, on my mind for this will be God working with plurality, God working with perspectivalism, evolutionary God, healthy and unhealthy versions of how we relate to God. What kind of God could Nietzsche get behind is sort of always the question in the back of my mind. Have we mourned the death of God adequately to move into a new format of the divine? How do we work this with pantheons of gods? Where does God and goddess conceptions come into all this kind of stuff? So that's where the discussion part of it will begin. And we'll have sittings and meditations and group exercises and social and nature time and all that normal stuff. But that will be the main theme this time. And we haven't really clarified the September one yet. I have a suspicion. I'd like it to be about sort of where sacred art and metamodern art come together, because I think there's a lot of philosophical richness and open questions still to figure out about how we hold aesthetics on this. But I'm kind of bracketing that because, like I said, it's important that the decision about the next theme come out of what's emerging in the one we're going into next.
That's great.
Well, I was going to say I don't really have much to add other than just to make the note that there is some kind of a drilling down into, oh, this would be alive for us, and so we do have that going into the event that people are aware of, and that does also inform kind of who are the folks that we invite for maybe kind of more special presentations or engagements or whatever, and so it does kind of structure it to that degree, but within a loose framing. Yeah.
And what are those?
The looseness is essential, I think, because part of the lab thing is what's coming up experimentally for people. And if somebody comes in and they go, look, so here's an energy practice, here's a body practice, here's a meditation practice. It's on the edge for me. I want to try it out with these people. It doesn't have to very explicitly be tailored around the concept of God or something like that. It's a loose balance of staying on task and doing what's coming up spontaneously.
So what are those dates again? Do you have, you must have the dates, right?
We're leaving that very loose. Whenever people want to show up here,
in my mind, I'm already there.
No, the weekend itself is May 20. Let me just make sure I think it's the 24th to the 26th, but I want to make sure I have that exactly right. So it's the 24th to the 26th is the weekend, and then if people want to come for the extended like a week-long part as well, then I think we start on the 21st or 22nd. That's all up on the Meadow Institute calendar, which maybe we'll link to, so people who are watching this and say, that all sounds so good, I want to take part, will have an opportunity to get all the details.
I'll be coming directly from the Integral Icon Future Human event in Denver the previous week, and just open invitation for anybody who's been to that central North American hub to desert them and betray them and come to the east.
I was going to sign up for that, but then I decided to stay loyal to the Archipelago. We can't travel that much.
So, Bonnie, what can you tell us about what you're going to be doing at Sky Meadow this year?
Okay, so I'll try to set it up first as a compare and contrast, because in many cases there's a lot of similarity. We're doing 3 retreats in early June, August, and October for similar reasons. Several people are coming to all the retreats because of this chance to see the same place in the 3 seasons. And we know that Vermont has dramatic seasonal changes. And that was actually something Brendan helped us with, like what would be the good timestamps for that. So that's an interesting opportunity to really receive the experience of the natural rhythms of nature, and to feel how the temporicity, the temporal aspects, rhythms of those different months will be something that we'll probably reflect on also. I mean, time changes between the spring and the October in the fall. So that would be the background. We're in a different situation because many people that will go to our retreats have been working online at the pop-up school very closely, very carefully for, if not the whole last year, then the whole 2 years. And so a lot of the cultural values and the kind of language we use and the depth of our intimacy is already pretty foundational. Now, having said that, we just opened the retreat to a much larger audience. And it is a retreat that you don't have to have been part of the pop-up school. You could be a free subscriber and just reading along with us. You could be a casual acquaintance of the pop-up school. So it's not the kind of thing where you have to have studied with us. But the opportunity here is that you end up being embraced and welcomed and in conversation with people who've already done a significant amount of work, which then automatically gives you the opportunity to deepen your own experience. So that's what's really different about our retreats, is that we've been working together online for quite a while, and that's going to make some difference. Now, having said that, we want to take advantage of the same things you were talking about, and that is basically just live together. From Thursday through Sunday, we've set it up so that we're doing our own breakfast, we're cooking our own lunches, to be in the kitchen together, to work in the gardens together if they need help in the gardens. I have the honor and the privilege and the benefit of having Aaron Cantor there, and he will be offering natural movement exercises. So what we're trying to do is not come together and focus so much on topics. We do have topics, I'll talk about that later, but all the work we've done, can we come together much in the spirit that you said, and just be natural together. So the topic of these retreats is cultivating the natural state, recognizing the natural state, obtaining the natural state, abiding in the natural state. And I think that this is something that's it can be a slippery or evasive, but it also, if you set it up right and with the right natural setting, it can land, I think, very quickly. And so one of the things that's different in what we're trying to do is we're trying to, a lot of the people that are going to come to this retreat, they go to breathwork retreats, they go to meditation, they go to Buddhist practices, they do collective presencing, they do all these psychotechnologies. And what we're trying to say is, yes, that's great, but what we've lost is leisure and openness and just natural attending to each other, just being bodies in space. Turns out this is what's hard for us, right? So we're trying to enjoy this retreat. It's a retreat, not a workshop. Like you said, like when you go and you hang out with your friends at Christmas, to create this more cultural or lyrical relationship to each other. And that's kind of the theme of it. Having said that, these people that are coming, my group is most of them lead their own kind of traditions, lead their own kind of practices, lead other groups, they're teachers themselves. So we get a chance to like have these little pop-up sessions where people will entertain their own practices and their own methodologies. And that will happen on a kind of ad hoc basis. So yeah, so that's kind of one framing. The other framing is that we're working with this concept of lyric culture, and in some formal way, we'll be using this concept to talk about these different ways of being together. And we basically have this kind of index card of talking about lyric culture. And that is, we have different ways to communicate with each other. And like a very fundamental way is to touch each other, right? And feel, I feel you, I touch you. And then this follows kind of an evolutionary stage. And then another way is to sign. Signing or gesturing is touch at a distance. And the other way is to sing. You sing your frustration, or you get angry, you make an oral sound, you voice something. These still pre-verbal. And then you end up, when you have oral narrative, when you have pre-narrative cultures, you can say, I say. This is like Gendlin. I can say more than I know. I can feel more than I can say. So these practices in getting to the natural state will be looping between these modes of communication. And then when we get to the great mythic cultures, then these are narrative cultures, then you go from I say to I tell. So it starts to get more directed. The Homeric epics are more like telling versus storytelling and saying in a more indigenous pre-Socratic, right? And then I tell. And then you get to the Platonic, and this is all about I name things, right? Courage, virtue. Let's name them and try to look at them as isolated variables. And so then we're saying that lyric culture, in some sense, goes back and recaptures or recapitulates some of the earlier forms. But what we bring into this kind of just mnemonic device or something is, how do we learn to disclose ourselves, right? So this is actually very interesting. Because we notice that most of the ways in which we try to tell people how we are, like I want you to get to know me, we get into like saying and telling and naming, and these actually obscure more than disclose who you are. And then you're like, why did I say that? And you get in these loops. And so what we're trying to do is practice some kind of being with each other, which is allows us to disclose ourselves in this very natural way. And we were on a call the other day, just to give you a sweet example, because we're trying to really not name what disclosing is. But one of my students said he was with his 10-year-old daughter, and they were taking a walk, and she started just to sing, and she was just walking and bouncing and singing. And he looked at her, and he was like, she was so not worried about what she looked. She didn't have like this reflexive loop, like, should I be singing? Or like, she was unaware of what Sartre would call, the gaze, the other that's looking at you. And so she just disclosed herself in this really beautiful way. And so that's kind of what we are going to try to play around with in over these three events. It's something new for us, and we're really happy to be in such a beautiful place as Sky Meadow, and be treated in the way that I know that Brendan and his staff will treat us, because I think that these kinds of experiments or labs, as you might call them, really depend upon the participation and the support of, you know, the people in the background who are making this happen. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. Yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
Anything you would add, Brendan, about your sense of Bonnie's three-part transcendental, all singing, all dancing gropathon?
Just that we're very excited to host Bonnie and her group here, and the fact that it is this sort of three retreat you know series in a way that there's again kind of like some continuity there, and some sort of expansiveness to that I think is really wonderful. And yeah, Bonnie is really the first to come to Sky Meadow explicitly under this new sort of Sky Meadow Institute banner of people who are doing this kind of work and exploring these kinds of issues. So we're just really thrilled to have you, Bonnie, and I'm looking forward to seeing and participating
Yeah.
in what happens.
Um, so we discussed ending this with some considerations around larger themes of bioregionalism and existential risk. And to start that, I felt like I wanted to sort of situate myself. I was born in the islands of the West Coast, but my father and his father and his father are from the Northeast. And I'm in Thunder Bay, Ontario now, which is basically the headwaters of the Great Lakes system. This is where the rivers and aquifers of the north come down to Lake Superior and start moving through that chain. Very mineral rich land, full of lightning storms, thousands of lakes, amethysts everywhere. And all of this goes down into the waters of the Northeast, goes out to the Atlantic, goes into the Toronto bioregion, which is the largest freshwater system outside the Amazon and is constantly under political and industrial attack here. We are joined up here with the same climate conditions of the Northeast US. Matt Finari and I spend a lot of time talking about the imaginal resonances of the geological and water systems shared in this part of the world. The last Metamodern spirituality retreat, I came down through the Endemic House in Saugerties, New York, where Bonnie and I will be doing back-to-back workshops in a couple of weeks. We usually have Greg Henriquez at the retreats. We have people come down from the Maple Monastery, where Bonnie and I and others were guest teachers and scholars at the Respond event. A few months ago, Tom Murray and I drove down from Toronto to his house and then to Bonnie's place to this wonderful horse sensing event. And then I came back on the Amtrak to Vermont to be the priest at Brendan and Erin's wedding. So, in saying these things, I'm trying to situate myself bioregionally and geographically and socially in order to help myself speak from out of the archipelago. And in that voice, I want to say, I guess, a couple of things. One thing is, wherever you are, make efforts to become indigenous more quickly and more deeply to that place. As the world, driven by the underlying structures of modernism and the technologies we have now, as this world moves and shakes and displaces and goes through its transition, we can't wait generations to adapt anymore. We have to be able to become local many times in our lives, and deeply so. And that means putting your bare feet on the ground. It means putting your head in the river. It means smelling the trees and nibbling the plants and watching how the animals move and hearing what's distinct about the wind in the trees in a particular place. It means doing whatever physical and imaginal and ritual things you need in order to sink more deeply into where you are. And as long as the anthropotechnical and social dimensions are too far apart from the ecological dimensions, I feel like we will suffer on this planet with civilization dissonance. Right? I experience naturalness as kind of the artful cross cultivation of nature and humanity, of biospheres and technologically enabled sapient species. And the key to that cross cultivation is something like morphological resonance. They need to pattern each other more deeply in order to move together toward thriving. You know, even though the human social, technological which is the source of contemporary X risk, is not ultimately different from nature. The non-difference is served by and embodied by a life of creative effort to constantly regenerate natural harmony from out of the changing conditions of nature and socio-technological existence by folding them back together. And that's, for me, part of the shamanic task. A lot of people probably know I've been doing this meta shamanics thing around how we identify and understand and co-train and mature and socially support shamanoids in the age of the meta crisis and in the metamodern ethos. So I'm especially attentive to the role of people living at the edge of the village, operating as intermediaries between human and non-human forms of complex intelligence. And I think that that role, and something that we're sort of looking at across all of these attempts to be bioregional, is essential to mitigating existential risk. It's not enough just to change the philosophy of how we approach knowledge and how we approach value. And it's not enough to just change the technological approaches that we're using. We have to be thinking about how instantiated complex realities such as land, such as nature, such as region, such as organism, how these things work with and co-pattern our social and technological and cognitive operating systems. Unless those things can enrich each other, then we're not going to get the kinds of solutions we need to overcome the existential risks that we're currently facing. So that's my initial take on the relationship. What about you, Bonnie? How are you thinking generally about bioregionalism, existential risk, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think part of this is driven by the suspicion that we all have that the world is changing rapidly and that there's some unprecedented, for us anyways. I mean, the human history has faced a lot of unprecedented crises, but certainly migration is a big part of what's going to shake our world. Bio Akamalafe says we want to build sanctuaries. So part of this chain archipelago has a sense of shared sanctuary. And having brought up his name, I believe he's going to be at Shoemaker this summer as a resident. And so then Shoemaker College is also part of this same archipelago. I think that when we first started being explicit on the web and social media about civilization collapse, and Game B, I think, had a big part of this. Everybody started thinking more in terms of epicenters, like people were moving to Texas and building fortresses, and people started thinking of, let's seed something in the middle of nowhere and it could grow. And it had more of this kind of city-state kind of growth mental model. And I think this notion of the archipelago as a syntax of a river or of a chain, I think that this is actually much more resilient and much more doable and much more natural in terms of facing these types of crises. And it also reminds me of when people like the Nature Conservancy put land into land trust. They always start building, they'll take this piece of land and that piece of, they always start looking for, little sections that then can be wedded together someday by, instead of these patches, because patches are kind of like dead zones for nature. It also reminds me of this book I read by Peter Brannon, The Ends of the World, and he talks about the 5 mass extinctions. It's an extraordinary story. But at a certain point, one of the reasons why one of the mass extinctions killed 96% of all the species is because at that time, the continents had come together and they were all isolated, in the same bioregion, around the North Pole. And so when it got really cold there nobody could escape. But then once the continents started aligning in a north-south axis, then the species were much more resilient because they moved with the intergalactic, and when the glacial ages came, they moved south, and when it got too hot, they moved north. And so the same kind of orienting toward the natural kinds of rhythms. These are very long-term rhythms, but they're the kinds of rhythms like, can you move north and south? If the south is flooded, can you move north? And if the north is burning in the summer, can you move south? Can this be a natural corridor, as that word is great that Brendan used. So I think these kinds of movements are going to happen anyway, and they either happen by force majeure, you have to take over someone's property, or we naturally design a rhythm, a natural rhythm, a corridor, a syntax of the archipelago, and then consciously, a lot of young people are moving into that time of their life, like, where do I want to live, and again, instead of seeing it as let me be near a city state, or let's like this vibrant center that's growing like this big circle, why don't I just live along this grid, because I have access to that whole ecosystem. And it reminds me of how this North America, this country anyways, and not so sure about old history, but all the regional expansion actually didn't happen from so much along the ocean. The ocean traded with Europe, but it was the great waterways that were most significant to the natural expansion of Europeans, settlers in the United States. And so like the Erie Canal, the Hudson. I once read that who wrote Moby Dick? What was his name? Melville. When the Hudson froze, they would skate up and down north, to go from north and south New York. And so again, just noticing that these kinds of ways of human migration and movement are natural, versus when you think of like the kind of migrations across whole oceans, and then all of a sudden 1 million people are right there. It puts a different kind of pressure versus this kind of riverian, got what the word is, corridor kind of movement. So I think I want to emphasize that, and also want to emphasize that we're not making it up. We're just kind of watching it happen and noticing that it seems to have a natural intelligence of its own.
Yeah, a lot of that resonates with me too. I mean, to kind of situate myself too in all this. And actually, Bonnie, would you maybe want to situate yourself? I mean, where are you from? What's your autochthonous soil that you sprang from?
Well, the interesting thing is that I grew up very close to here. And then I moved out to California. I lived in Arizona for a while, moved out to California. I went to South America, the whole thing, and then I ended up coming home very close to where I grew up. And so I'm very much not necessarily a Connecticut person, but a New England person. I feel that my true native soul is most resonant with Mount Desert Island in Maine, the islands in Maine, where I lived there with my dog for a couple of years alone on a deserted island. And so the mountains, where the mountains meet the sea, and these rolling hills, I'm not, these beautiful mountainscapes, the Rockies, these beautiful panoramas are wonderful, but the West doesn't speak to me as home in that way. I happen to live next to a state park where the glacial granite meets a lake, and it is like a microcosm of the islands off the coast of Maine. And I'm surrounded on 3 sides by state forest, hemlock, beech, birch forest. Like, I guess you might just say like a real Davy Crockett archetype. This is when I've traveled, I've loved being in other bioregions. I did a lot of hiking and biking and skiing in California, but I always felt like all those years I was on vacation. And it's very clear to me that this bioregion is kind of home.
Yeah. So I'm from Vermont myself. I grew up here, born here, and I've always felt a very deep kind of kinship to Vermont, specifically in the Green Mountains here. I kind of think of it as like the Shire. And I've had that feeling of when I've gone away. I've loved doing a lot of traveling too, but especially when I lived further, actually when I lived in Connecticut, I had this longing for the Shire. So this whole thing that we're talking about actually has a lot of I've been kind of grappling with these ideas for a while, for a long time, at least for the last 10 years, as I've been working through some of the literary projects and stuff that, and the conceptual projects that I've been doing, because a very long-term project I was working on for a period was a framing of my work that was sort of, and I'm actually going to be putting out a version of this soon. So I've been kind of returning to it because it is still very much alive. But thinking about a future civilization that's sort of retroactively looking back on its canons and its scriptural and mythic ideas and kind of where they came from, and situating that after a transition of some momentous nature, as we're going through, and I think are about to go through even more so. I originally conceived of that a lot more sort of apocalyptically, that, there was this climatological shift and this deep kind of collapse, and I was very concerned about that. And so my attention was very much drawn towards thinking about how we could live in connection with the land, and in that kind of, back to the land movement, with a, through the lens of trying to become more robust and stable in our systems, and the role that permaculture would play in these sort of communities and that sort of a thing. And actually, a lot of my thinking has shifted in the sense of I don't think about it. Maybe I choose not to think about it so much as this radical disruption, as much as more of a regeneration. And I certainly hope for much more of the latter kind of framing, that we can collectively regenerate culture and regenerate our institutions in a way where, yes, disruption may indeed be a deep part of that, but something that's a bit more, I think, hopeful in the sense that we can imagine a future, and that future can be bright, and that we don't have to necessarily go through this refining fire of intense suffering. That's, I think, what we're all kind of hoping for in some ways. But I think however you frame the situation that we're in, that we're facing, the crises that we're facing, I think that regardless of any of that, there seems to be an obvious value in putting down deeper roots where you are, and in forming deeper local communities, and in making those more robust and more anti-fragile. Just for its own sake, on its own terms, that the richness of your life experience that you get from, drinking the fresh natural milk that you get from, delivered from down the road, from the farm down the road, or, the meat that you consume coming from a nearby farm, and being more in touch with the kind of resources that are coming locally, all that stuff, I think a lot of people understand. I think when you tie that into the urgency and the needs to restructure our society more along those lines, it takes on a different kind of urgency and a different kind of importance. But that's always been something that struck me, and I've grappled with throughout, is sort of like, even if the best case scenario holds true, that we can find ourselves on the other side of the shore from a lot of the meta crisis issues that we're facing, in a way that doesn't need to pass through some profoundly disruptive, destructive, awful, interim period, let's say, that all of that is still the direction that we need to be moving in, and is sort of inherently valuable and meaningful. And so I've always connected that to the place that I've been from, and where I've lived most of my life, and the beautiful kind of ethos too that I think permeates a lot of Vermont culture, and sort of being, very act local, think global sort of a thing. but where for me a lot of that also connects in with this metamodern stuff and the metamodern spirituality mythopoeia is this sense that we are creating something new, we're creating a new culture. And when you look back to what humans have always done in their indigenous context, it is to tell stories about where they are and where they've come from, and to tell stories about the land, and to have a kind of connecting meshwork of ideas and symbols and stories that come from the place itself and have a kind of history from the place itself. Whether that's let me tell you the story of where that mountain came from, or the particular ancestor that gave rise to our particular group of people, or whatever it is. There's a deeply kind of place-based sense of the mythopoeic sensibility, and I feel like as we are entering this sort of second axial age, the second sort of recrudescence of this sort of like mythological generation from a metamodern sensibility. All of that seems to make sense, that we would be doing that from places, from specific locales, and kind of enshrining that in meaningful ways. And so, given that there is this sort of natural intelligence that's producing this sort of organic emergence of this archipelago of communities, that to me is sort of like almost kind of a prophetic realization of what I had hoped or would dream might come about sort of organically. And that then it's sort of, I think, an invitation to think more about that consciously and intentionally, and see like, how do we give expression to this? How do we become more meaningful about relating to each other, both economically, narratologically, symbolically, et cetera, and being intentional about all that, again, against the backdrop of climactic shifts and institutional restructuring and all that. And I think maybe just one more thing I'd say is that, Bonnie talked about sanctuaries, and for me, there's something very there's something I feel called to do in terms of like creating that sacred space. There's something about like temple building that seems very that just really calls to my soul. And of course, temples exist in places. Yes, we live in this sort of disembodied digital culture that's networked around the globe, and we can have those kinds of interactions, and there's places for those too. But there's also this, I think, need to have places, shrines, altars, and the collective effort that goes into sanctifying and enshrining certain locales with significance. And some of that comes through the kind of like calendrical, seasonal, stuff that we were talking about in another context. But part of it just comes out of the collective effort of people coming together and enriching and beautifying and intentionalizing a specific space or set of spaces. So I'm finding this whole talk about the archipelago very enlivening, and it brings up a lot of stuff for me that I've been sitting with and kind of working with in many ways over the past decade. And that's both invigorating and exciting and inspirational. And I guess I'd invite other people, and this is sort of where this is going, right? Is to try to invite others into this, and to express what they're doing in their places, and to invite more conversation around the places that are part of this web. And I guess I'll leave it there for now.
I'm torn. I could say a few more things, but also that was a really nice place to
I
stop.
know, that was nice.